Hey, good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I'm going to continue with my sort of crash course for Unity and using some of the basic functions. So today we're going to add scripts, we're going to do some materials, add some terrain, add something called ProBuilder, which helps you design more complex shapes, and also get into some of the managing of the assets, which can be one of the more challenging parts, especially as you start to add more structures and different things. So just to kind of do a quick overview, what I discussed yesterday was adding the basic shapes. So if you go up here, this is where you can add all of your primitive shapes. So these are the shapes that are pretty standard in Unity, especially for like the gray boxing or white boxing process, which is to just sort of build out your game with basic shapes before getting into some of the more complex animations and things like that. So what I'm going to do first is actually add a script into the program so that we can move our character around. Because right now we have our character, but we can't really do anything with it. It's just sort of everything's kind of stationary. So I'm going to go through the process of like animating, and then we can talk about like how you can set up a pretty simple game from some of these basic elements that are right here. So the first thing that I'm actually going to do, and this is really helpful when you're getting started, is I'm going to reset the transform of both the capsule and the camera because these two things are going to be put together when I add this script. And so I want you to see like how this process works for kind of managing moving your game objects around, trying to get them to be in the right spot and kind of follow the correct camera angles and things like that. So to reset a transform, if you go to the capsule, we'll start here. If you go to this transform element, which is a position, rotation, and scale. So this is where it is in the world, the rotation. Most times for your player character, it's going to be 0, 0, 0, and your scale, we're going to leave at 1, 1, 1. If I right click here, or if I click on these three dots, I'm going to hit reset. You'll see that it's going to put it right in the middle like this. Now I'm going to leave it there, and then I'll move it after this next step. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this camera, and I'm also going to reset the transform. So now these two objects are together. You'll notice, like if I click on my game view, that I can't see anything like it's like the floor isn't there. That's because my object is sort of halfway between the floor, or the camera's between the floor and the top of the object. So it sort of eliminates it in Unity. It clips it out of it. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this camera and I'm going to drag it onto the capsule. So this is what's called making a child object of the camera. And all of this means, for us right now at least, is that it is attached to the capsule. So if I move the capsule, it's also going to move the camera. I'm going to point out a couple of things. So now you can see here, if I'm looking at this, I see through the capsule. So the capsule's position, rotation, and scale is here, but you'll notice when I click on the camera, it's still at 0, 0, 0. The reason for that is because this is now relative to this. So that means when it's attached to it, any distances I put here are going to be relative to where the capsule is, not necessarily where it is in the actual world. So if you see a parent and child object, that part is important. So I'm going to move this position to zero point 0.5, and that's going to be a kind of eye level for the capsule. Okay, so now I have this in a pretty good spot. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is import my script. And there's a few ways to do that, but I tend to prefer to go through Unity instead of clicking and dragging from the File Explorer. So I can go into my File Explorer and I can just find it and drag it into this area here, and it will add the script. But sometimes it gets like you can accidentally add it to a folder that you don't want to, and that's called a nested folder, and that can be it can make it difficult to find some of the assets. So what I do is I'll go into this folder I've designated for my script. I'm going to right click, and you're going to see this option to import a new asset. And then you'll see here I have these files that I've used for other games. I'm just going to go into my downloads folder, and there it is. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to double click it, and you'll see that it is importing. Now it does take a bit of time to do. So especially if you have a complex script, like if you look at this script right here, you'll see that there's a lot of elements to it. So I'm just using kind of a standard GitHub first person movement script. Um, and so this is what it looks like. Again, you have to give it a second for a longer script to do this, which is essentially compile. Now, my next step is when I want to add it to this object. So this is going to get our character to move. What I'm going to do, and I have a few options. Like I said before, if I have a material, I can drag it onto the character. But sometimes, like this script, if I drag it onto something, there's no sort of visual representation that it actually attached to this object. So the way that I prefer to do this is I will take this script, since I'm clicked on my capsule, and I'm going to just drag it over here. And now you can see that it is added to my character. Now, there is going to be one other issue that you may encounter. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play just so you can see what this looks like. And you'll see like it's in the correct place, but I have this error down here which says you're trying to read the Unity input class, but it's switched input handling. This is pretty common in my experience. If you're using an older script, a lot of times what happens is when you add it, you have to switch the input handler. Um, so to do that, when you go to edit up here, you're going to see your project settings. And this is where you want to change like a lot of things about your game. So you can see that there's a lot of settings and things right here. Most of them, when you're just starting out, you're not going to use, but this is one, especially if you're just attaching scripts. You're going to go into player. And if you look through this, you'll see that it says input system package. And I'm going to click both. Then I'm going to hit apply. And then I'm going to hit save. Now, what will happen is it's going to restart your program. So it does take a second to do that. And then it's just switching the input handler. So it essentially has to reset. So you can see like it's going through this process. Usually when this happens, it doesn't take too long. And then once it reopens and I hit play, I should be able to move and look around. So this script is one that we discussed and we used in my class, but it's something that is just a simple first person movement. There's no dash, there's nothing like that. You can't jump. It's just to be able to move around. Right, so now it has reloaded. And so what should happen is when I hit play, I should be able to walk around and kind of look at each of the objects. So you can see I have this character controller, I'm looking around, and then if I hit AWSD, the mouse, if I'm moving forward, it follows where the mouse is looking. If I move backwards, I can do all of these things. So you also notice again, if I try to run into something, you can see the shadow there. Um, and if I look down, you can see this shadow, but otherwise this is a pretty basic scene that I've started to use. So this is a good way when you're starting a game and you know you're going to use first person movement to test. Like I said, these are primitive objects. They don't have the level of design you would see in something like Maya or Blender or 3ds Max. But if you just wanted to get some basic levels, it's called prototyping, or you could look at it as gray boxing or white boxing. So now that we have our character movement and everything, what I'm going to do next is add a couple of textures and terrain. So to add a terrain, you go to plus, you go to 3D object, you're going to see this option here that says terrain. Now, what's going to happen at first is it's going to kind of clip through this environment because again, it's setting it at 0, 0, 0. I want to point this out. This is a big block of terrain, but it's scaled at 1, 1, and 1. So it's just again to remember this is not the same thing as this plane here, which is still much smaller than the terrain. You can't do a ton of like resizing. Like if I click on it and I try to scale it, it's really just like it takes a little bit of like time to get used to how the terrain sort of works. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this terrain here for now. I'm going to show you some of the tools that terrain uses. The most common one is this one right here where it says paint terrain. All right, and you'll see it says raise or lower terrain. So there's a drop down list that's right here. And you have these brushes. So I'm going to pick something like this, and I'm going to keep this, and you're really just drawing. Now, some things to also consider, like when you're using cameras and you're trying to manage memory, like you probably won't in a level explore all of this terrain or even let your player get to this whole area. And it can be like one big level. So I'm going to take a few different pieces of terrain right here. I'm just going to show you what this looks like. There we go. And then I'll take this one, I'll add like a plateau. And you also have these options. Like as you're raising the terrain, let's say I make this like way too big. If you hold shift, then it will lower the terrain kind of like that. So important thing to consider when you're designing the terrain is the movement of your character. So if I put a really steep cliff right here, I'm not going to be able to climb it because I don't have a jump on my character right now. And you may add that later, but it is like if you're testing mechanics and getting your level set up, you do have to think about, okay, what can the character actually do and how can we, make this terrain work for the movement that I'm going to be using in my game. So I think this looks good so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit plus or play, and I'm just going to go explore really quick. And you can see again, I have all of these characters here, and I can move and I can see the terrain. Now I can go explore. This would take me a long time to get to the end of this. And you can see, like, if I get to some of the steeper areas, I can't do much with it. I can just kind of climb and look around. But again, you may have different mechanics that you want to include. And so this is how you would sort of begin setting up the level. All right. So, with that being said, now we want to probably add some different textures into our level. Maybe add some enemies or some things like that to get our characters to, have more interaction, more like a real game, and then add some animations and textures so that this looks more like a video game we would be playing. So I'm going to show you where those things are. If you go to Window, you're going to see this package management and you're going to go to package manager. The first thing I'm going to add is something called ProBuilder. And I'm also going to add this terrain asset pack, which is free. So when you go to the package manager, I'm going to look for ProBuilder. Again, it's under the Unity registry. And then I'm just going to click install. Now this one is a pretty big element in Unity, so it does take a bit of time, which I'm not going to have you watch all of that process because it does take a couple of minutes. But it is something that I think you would use a lot. It gives you a lot of flexibility. It can save you time for things like stairs and some basic shapes that you may be using, but aren't, you they aren't part of the primitive volumes that Unity has. So I'll let this run and then I'll be back in just a second. All right, so now I have ProBuilder that's in the scene. And to use ProBuilder and the newer versions of Unity, what you do is you'll go up to Tools, you'll see ProBuilder, and then you'll see these editors right here. So there's two things that I really like focus on when it comes to using ProBuilder. One of them is this poly shape, and it's really just like you're drawing a shape. So if you click, you can use the just point in the area, and then you can click, and I'll just add this shape right here. And then when you close it, you'll see it change color, and then it'll release the mouse, and then you'll have this new structure that you can go into. So it looks like this. And the nice thing about it is because it's a ProBuilder shape, if I want to add a color to it, it works just like any other shape in Unity, which is awesome. It's one of the advantages of using ProBuilder and designing things in the game engine versus trying to import things. But again, you're not going to get the same level of detail as you would in more specifically designed programs. So again, we'll just see what this looks like when we look in the scene. All right, so there it is. And when you look around, you have the shape. So it has the same exact functions as any other shape. Now, when I go to the other ones, I'm going to go to ProBuilder, or I'm going to go to Tools, ProBuilder, Editors, and then I'm going to see this one that says Create Shape. And this gives you a few more options of different shapes that it sort of just standardizes. So the most common one is stairs. So the way to do that is you click and then you hold the mouse, and then you can see here, like as I'm drawing this, if I let go, it will make the stairs. So if I go into this area, and I can go in and move and rotate and scale and do all of that, you can see that there's properties as well. And now when I go into my scene, I can see that it added the stairs for me. And this works for a variety of shapes. Now, because we have a capsule and we don't really have like a movement to go up like this, it is just going to kind of keep me at the bottom here, but that's also okay. So again, I'll try another shape. If I go to Tools, ProBuilder, we'll go to Editors, Create Shape, and I'm going to pick a prism. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click, drag, and then when you release the left mouse button and lift up like this, then you're going to have that shape there. You can also go in and edit it like this. So if I want to make this a little wider, those are options as well. If you go here and you do the shape properties, I can change the prism, I can change the pivot, I can change its size. But then once I've hit escape and I've kind of clicked and gone to something else, then the shape it's not completely finished. You can still go in and edit it, but to save time, you probably want to have an idea of what dimensions you want from the beginning. So kind of seeing this now, again, I could move it around in here if I need to. These are the basics of like adding different shapes. Again, these are simple shapes. You can go in and change some of it, but it can be really helpful for these basic things that you may have in a game, but you don't necessarily want to build in other software to import. All right, so now we have all of this. I can make this a prefab. So let's say that I really like these stairs right here. If I go to my prefabs folder, I can drag this in. Okay, I can go into my prefab mode. And if I want to add a material, let's say I wanted to make them green stairs. Now when I go in, I've added them, made them green. And the other nice thing is I can just keep dragging them in if I want, which again saves a ton of time. Okay, so the other thing I wanted you to see about terrain, because we're going to go in and edit a few things here, is you have some other options. So you have paint texture, which is what we're going to be using next once we import the files. You can also set a height for things. You can stamp it. When you go here, these are trees. This is grass or grass details. And so these are things that you need actual like asset packs for, or things that you would need to build. There is a tree editor in Unity, and there's a wind zone, but it can be a little bit challenging to get set up at first. But it again, it's kind of the advantage of having prefabs. If you have something you can build in the game engine, it tends to run a little better, especially at the beginning stages, while you're testing things out. So I'm going to go back to my package manager, and I'm going to go into my assets here. So this is all of the stuff that I have gotten from the Unity Asset Store. And I can see that I have these terrain sample asset packs. So I'm going to go ahead and import that just like I did with the ProBuilder. And you're going to see a variety of assets that work in this engine. Again, I'm going to pause the video for just a sec because it does take a bit to load, and then I'll show you the next steps. So one thing I'm going to point out is that when you download asset packs like this, sometimes it can take a while. Like you do want to be patient. You will see the loading screens and things, but you can see like right here, there's a lot of things that will, it's importing. So it's not something to worry about if there's a lot of things that you're downloading, like some asset packs have a lot of like animations or they have a lot of detail. It will take a bit. You may encounter this message. This is not something to worry about, really. Um, in my experience, it usually has to do with things that are related to like different versions of Unity. So I just close it and then I click import. Once it goes through all of that process and you see that list, it usually doesn't take too much more time. But again, it is something to sort of note. It can take a bit if you can and you don't have a lot of stuff that you need to be running in the background. Sometimes that speeds it up. But just again, be patient while it uploads. I think in total, even though the video didn't take I didn't show you that entire process. It's taken about 5 minutes or so, which is usually about pretty average. But I've seen some asset packages take anywhere from like 10 to 15 to even like 20 minutes once you have the final steps or once you import it. And this is just a sample one. There's some that are a lot bigger. Okay, so now we have our asset pack installed. You can see that it's right here. You can see the models, like there's a lot of different things that come into the asset pack. But for our purposes, we're just going to add some of those to the terrain. So the first thing I'm going to do is where you go to paint terrain, you're going to see this paintbrush. This is where you have this drop down. I'm going to go to paint texture, and then I'm going to see this option that says edit terrain layers. The first thing I'm going to do is create a layer. And because I have this asset pack now, this will work for a lot of like JPEG and PNG images, but I'm just going to start with this and you have all of these different things that you can pick, but I'm just going to start with this grass here. Now what will happen is the entire terrain block will change into this. Now, some other things that I can do is if I want to add another layer, like let's say I want to add some rocks to the top of this mountain, I can click right here, and what will happen is I have this brush now that I can use. So if I pick this brush and I wanted to change it to this, you can see like, again, I have to click it and then you can see that it's changing it. It's kind of tough to see, but you can see it right there. It's changed it some. Now I can change the brush size. So if I want it to be like maybe a little bit more exact, and then I paint this just like I would use Microsoft Paint. I hold the left mouse button, and as I go through, I now have these rocks. And you can see it like when I hit play, you can see what that looks like. So again, it may take the more stuff you add to your scene, something to also note, especially when you're getting started, it sometimes takes a little bit more to load, like when your game begins. So you can see my computer is slowing down a little bit. And so that is an important part of making games too, is not just the design, but also like how can this run well on the computers that I have. So optimization is important, but you can see there, I now have this texture on the grass. Okay, so some other things that I can add. If I go to these trees, again, it's going to be a pretty similar process. I'll go to edit trees, I'll pick add tree, and it's going to say what tree do you want to use, and it's going to have your list of trees that you've imported. So you may have some that you've downloaded, you may have some that you've designed. There are programs specifically for that. So I'm just going to take this one right here. I'm going to double click, and then I'm going to click add. Now it's going to do the same type of thing. I'm going to have a brush right here. And then when I go in, you can see like now I've placed trees. Now this has the tree density. It says 83. I probably don't want that many, but maybe I want to place some like right here so you can see them around. Um, And so again, when I go in, it's tough to see at this point, but when I hit play, you're going to see all of those trees in there too. Again, it will take some time for the camera to sort of adjust to the new details, but you can see there they are. And there's a lot of other factors that you can add. Like again, I probably don't need this many trees or this much because you can see it's having to render all of them. So the other details are largely the same when you're in the terrain editor. If you go to paint details, you can pick a brush. Again, you can edit details right here, and then you can add a mesh or a texture, and you would largely print them the same way. The last thing I'm going to discuss in this video is going to be the camera. So you notice that when I was running through this scene and adding the textures, that a lot of times it began to slow down as my game had more textures. So there's a few things I can do to make that a little bit better. I can change the field of view to be like a little bit less. Okay, so I can't look around quite as much. I can also change the clipping planes to be a little bit less too. So I'm just going to do this to 500, and you can see like it generally at 1,000. So it goes pretty far, but I'm going to make this a little bit less and just kind of show you what it looks like. So when I'm looking through this game now, again, if I'm kind of seeing the details, it's not going to make it as like I can't see quite as far into the distance, which is going to help my performance quite a bit, but it may look, at least initially, like the camera, like the game isn't quite as detailed. But 1,000 is very far into the distance. And again, you can see like here, I'll just kind of show you the difference. If I change this back to 1,000, you can see more details further away. So it requires a bit more of the computer, but you can see what it looks like right here. So again, I can change my field of view to be like a little bit less, like this. And then I can change my near and far clipping planes to be less too, and that will help some with the management of my memory. You also have options for things like culling masks. You have different stacks of cameras that you can add. So if you need to switch cameras, you can see that it shows the background type, but you can also change it to be a solid color. Okay, you can pick the color if you want. So if I want it to be like this green color, now I don't know if we like that, but um, that is an option as well. So those are things that you can do. I'm going to leave it at the skybox. Um, And you also have options for things like culling masks, which means if I don't want something displayed, if I put a layer on it, then it won't display it. So right now it says everything is displayed. But let's say I'll just show you an example. Let's say that I made a layer and I called it enemies. And then I were to tag those things, so I can see this right here. I go to my enemies, and if I change them to this enemy layer, I'm going to go ahead and just change all of the objects here, which will save me some time. Again, these are prefabs because you can see this blue writing. When I go back to my camera and I look at my culling mask, you can see if I say enemy, then that means it won't display anything that's tagged as the enemy. So right now I can see this, but I'll just show you again. If I hit play and I move around, none of my enemies are here now. So this can be really useful for things like if you are far away from something, you can set it so like it's not going to display it at a certain time. You can also have it set like after a certain amount of time, I don't want to display user interface elements. And so that can be a way to add details to the scene that it can render without having to do like everything at once. So it's a really big balancing act, but a lot of that is done through things like the camera. Okay, so we have one more video for our crash course. This was the terrain, this was adding the scripts. So a lot of these processes are things that you're going to be doing when you first start out. The next things that we're going to be looking at are adding animations, doing animations and sprite sheets, and then using like making a build with an object that's in the scene to end the game. So I'll see you in the next video.